Yep. No, you're good.
Okay, thank you. All right, so energizing young voters, you go down to the League of Women Voters tab. And when you scroll down, you should see startup checklist down at the bottom on the left-hand side. And then you'll have a whole, a layout of what you do. So you can check them off as you actually do it. The first thing that I would recommend is to start small. And by that, I mean just choose one of our modules, really get familiar with that module, whatever it may be, and then offer that to the schools that you're going into. And usually the next question is, so which one do we start with? And there are two that I think are good possibilities. I would personally start with one of the ones on the voting side, because particularly with 2024 coming up, I think it's important for us to generate enough interest so kids have the intention to vote when that election comes up. In order to do that, the one that I think is most impactful is the timeline of suffrage. And the thing that is good about that is that, like right now, during Women's History Month, you can go into a school and say, we have this program, we're happy to bring in a guest speaker, and then give them a copy of the slideshow so they know what to expect. I've been successful doing that by contacting individual teachers, and sometimes that's the easiest way. And then they do all the paperwork if they need to bring in a guest speaker. Sometimes I would say the second level of success has been with social studies supervisors. We've presented several years running now at the social studies supervisors state level meeting. So there are a good number of supervisors who are familiar with what we're doing. They may never have brought us in, but you've got a good shot if they have already participated in it partly. In one case, I knew the principal of the school, and so the principal worked with me. Just recently with Plainfield, we had like a dual thing. We had the woman who was the president of the board at the time and the social studies supervisor, both interested. And I think it was Catherine who approached the social studies supervisor to say, what do you think about this? So those are things. I would not try the superintendent. There's just too much on a superintendent's plate to have them give the attention to this that it needs for them to feel comfortable bringing it in. I would let the school employee do whatever work needs to be done to clear the path for a league person to come in as a guest speaker. I would also, you've got a nice group here started. I would never try to get this up and running all by myself. There are, in a particular county, for example, here I had one other person that I worked with initially, and then we offered an in-person training. This was before COVID, and we had 20 people come to a library, and about 6 of those people decided that they wanted to be guest speakers as well. So we held a training session for them. That one was more information and experiencing. And then we held an actual training session so they could get their hands on the slideshow and on the script and become familiar enough with it. And then they practiced with one another to feel really comfortable. We're doing the same thing right now with Boulder County, Colorado. They've decided to adopt it. And they started with 2 people, and then they grew to the point where they had, I think it was 6 people that were interested in co-presenting. So I'm saying all this to say to you, don't think that you're going to be able to do this next week. It may take you a month to get people engaged and familiar with the material, but that's okay. It's even okay if it takes you the rest of the year and you focus on beginning in schools next year, because you've got to get the invitation to come in and you've got to get people prepared to go in as guest speakers. So whatever it takes you to get to that point, you're in good shape.
Yeah. What was the other, you were saying there were two that you recommended. The timeline was one. And what was
The timeline of suffrage is the first one. And I said that's because it has an emotional impact.
Right.
If you are starting right before an election, we've used the Student Advocate Toolkit and adapted it to each one of the counties. And I'm not sure if it's adapted yet for Union County, but it's very simple to do. It's just simply a matter of changing like addresses of the Board of Elections, phone numbers, that sort of thing. We keep that updated. So you can always go back to our website and just copy and paste the important dates for the upcoming elections. Of course, you can also find that information on your own county Board of Elections website. And I'll tell you, Union County's Board of Elections is sharp. They have been so helpful in organizing the voting simulation that Plainfield Public Schools are doing this coming month, the end of the month. I've worked with probably 5 or 6 different boards of elections, and they've been cooperative, but never like Union County. So any of you from that county, you have gold there. I don't have any knowledge of Hunterdon County. I don't know what their situation is. I know it's a much more conservative part of the state. I don't know if that would have anything to do with it, but it shouldn't, because the law in New Jersey requires that when voting machines change, the County Board of Elections is responsible for 4 years for providing educational experiences. So you can count on them, for example, to bring in a voting machine to a school, to have the kids actually use it, to use the tablets and that sort of thing. The other piece of solid information that you should have before you do this is that there is also state law that requires every school district in the state to provide the opportunity for those students who will be eligible to vote in the upcoming election to have the opportunity to register and to be educated about voting. The superintendents need to sign off on that every year. They need to verify that that's actually happened. So when you approach a school, you can say, we can do this for you. You don't have to worry about it. All you need to do is give us a date and help us arrange for the spot that we're going to run the voter registration drive. And we'd like to come into the classroom and talk about voting. And that's when the Student Advocate Toolkit is really helpful. It goes through, actually, let me show it to you. I'm going to go through the website so you can see how to do it. So to get to any of our programs that we offer, you have to go to the educators and community group. And when you click on that and scroll down, you'll see all of the lessons that are currently available for schools. Excuse me, let me just take a drink. Okay, so the suffrage timeline is the first here. You click on the plus, you click on the view module, and you have 2 things available to you. The slideshow and script come up. If you do the slideshow remotely for anybody, the teacher's notes or the presenter's notes can be found below the screen so that you can use the presenter mode. If you are presenting in person, teachers have asked for a script so that they can actually print it out and have it in their hands, which works beautifully for the timeline of suffrage, because essentially it's a story we're telling. So the person can read it from the script like they would be reading to their grandchildren or their kids or something like that. So you have to put the, you know, the pizzazz into it, but you can actually read the script and know that you're giving them accurate information about each of the points at which people got voting rights.
Wow.
The other thing that's available to you at that, when you click on the link from the website, is the avatars. It is a game, and the avatars, I print the avatars on 3x5 cards. And then because I use them so much, I had them laminated at Staples. There are about 50 cards. I think there's 49 now. 49 actual avatars. And so I print those in the Staples. I think it cost me about $80 to get the 49 of them done. So you've got those that you can use when you play the game with them. And for us, when we're setting up the game, this chart tells you the distribution percentages. And somebody pointed out to me last night that the 30% of men and the 50% of women that show up in the first four things is not exactly right. And I said, well, yeah, so I should probably change it to 15%, 15%, and 15%. I'm not sure if those are the actual numbers, but 10% of them should be eligible to vote at the end of the revolution. Another 10% at the end of the need for property rights, and another 10% of Black men. And then in 1920, when women get the right to vote, because they're half the population, half of the avatars that you give out should be women. There are 18-year-olds who don't get the vote until the 26th Amendment, and that's about 5% of the population. And then we put in some other people like non-citizens who would never be able to get the right to vote. And we added some. Initially, we kept the like Native Americans and Asian groups as like add-ons, and I'll tell you what I mean by that, to make up a few extra people. But I have recently changed that when I'm doing it, and I include those people within these groups because I now do something that I didn't do in the beginning. The timeline of suffrage, when it was first written, was white. I mean, I saw it and I loved the thing, but I thought, oh, this is not going to fly in my town, you know? Because there was no acknowledgement of the fact that even though Black men and women had the right to vote legally, that they didn't have the ability to vote because of voter suppression. And that Asians didn't even have citizenship until after 1920. And that Indigenous didn't have citizenship until after 1920. So I felt like there was and handicapped people, you know, had the legal right, but they didn't have access to voting facilities. So I felt like we should add those avatars. When we offer this to other states to use, my recommendation has been to try to also balance the avatars based on the distribution of ethnicities in their own area. So in New Mexico and Arizona, for example, there need to be much larger number of Hispanic avatars and Native avatars. And in Montana, they don't have the Hispanic population, but they do have the Native population. So they're adjusting it and creating their own avatars to reflect the percentages of population there. If you have a very urban district like I'm in, you should probably have far more. Well, I think it's pretty even now, but you should have a better distribution that includes the Black population. so that when you start asking people to sit down, you can see how the vote has been suppressed in that particular area more clearly. So I'm going to stop there because that's a lot of information. So tell me what questions you have about the distribution of avatars.
I don't understand what the game is. What, you know, if you could
Oh, okay. Good question.
step back and tell us what we're doing.
Thank you. When we go into a setting, we have those avatar cards and we distribute one per student. And I often give one to the teacher too, because I think it's important for them to feel the same things that the kids feel. So their avatar card is very likely to be a very different person or have different characteristics than they do. Some of the avatars are white men 21 years old and property owners, and the distribution according to the voting requirements over here. But some might be like 98 years old and I'm working with 15-year-olds. So I give them a couple of seconds to think about what it would be like to live inside the skin of their avatar, because that's who they are for this game. And then the game proceeds through the different points in time that people gain the right to vote. And as they gain the right to vote, there's a point when you say, if you can vote now, please stand up. And initially, let's say you have a class of 30, initially you'll see 3 people stand up. And then I kibitz with them and I say, oh, how do you feel? You know, and they go like, oh, we got the power. We can make all the decisions for everybody else who's in this room. And then the same thing happens. 3 more people might be added at the next point when property rights are removed. And I said, all right, how do you feel? And they're all, yay. And I go back to the first group and I say, and how do you feel? Your power has just been cut in half. And it's like, oh, I don't know if I like that very much. And then we go on and do the same thing once Black men have the right to vote. And then they get it. They say, oh, okay, so these people in the past are not going to be real happy when Black men also get the right to vote. And so when you get to the voter suppression part of it, it makes sense to them too. And the same thing with women. Yeah, I mean, and even women fought against it, as you know, for a long time. They just didn't think that was the role that women should have. So you build this, and each time you'll see more and more people standing up. And when you get to women, most of the room is standing up. And then there's a slide where you say, but it's complicated. And that I say, okay, Black men and Black women, you have the legal right to vote, but unfortunately, I'm going to need to ask you to sit down. If you're Asian, unfortunately, you are not eligible to be citizens yet, so you need to sit down. If you're Indigenous, you don't have citizenship yet. You need to sit down. If you are Latina or Latino, you need to sit down because you can't read the registration form or the ballot, and you are given a literacy test when you walk in to see if you can vote. If you're handicapped, you don't have access, so you need to sit down. And what happens is you get back to the point where you see it's pretty much the same as it was in 1856. And then I stop and I say, okay, talk to each other about how you feel about what just happened. And it's really impactful.
Wow.
When I do professional development workshops, I stop the whole thing right there. And I tell them that we then go through the rest, you know, how did each one of those groups regain the right to vote, and how did we overcome some of the voter suppression that was occurring? And we are starting to have kids actually read that so that you can click on the slide and hear a young person's voice, like a young Black woman, a young Chinese girl. The people in Montana are getting us a young Indigenous person to do the same thing. So eventually you'll be able to hear their voices explaining what they had to do in order to gain the right to vote. So that's the distribution, and that's how the game is played. So now questions. No questions, you're smart.
I have a comment. One of the things I was thinking about is incarcerated people. You know, I know that's included in the categories, but I think as more and more states are changing the laws, I don't know more and more, but at least New Jersey, and
Mhm.
letting formerly incarcerated people get the right to vote. And that was only a few years ago.
Two.
And
Yeah.
two. And I know that there's a group working on getting the vote for incarcerated people, which is what, 2 states? I
Yeah.
know it's Vermont, but I
Uh,
don't remember. I think
uh,
it's
I
Maine. I don't know. One of those.
I think it's Vermont and Maine, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, so I was just curious about that.
That's the kind of thing where you can, I never thought of that, so I'm glad that you mentioned that. But that's the kind of thing where you could add something like that state by state.
Right,
And then, it raises the question, like, citizenship wasn't a term here until the Civil War. And it was necessary to define it in the 14th Amendment, because the first question was, now Black men are that slavery is considered illegal or outlawed. The second thing is, all right, now we have all of these Black men. Are they able to vote? And if they are, how do we do that? So they determined that citizenship applied to people, including the formerly enslaved, people who were born here in the United States. And then they added in something that referred to all of the people who were here before, so that if they were born elsewhere, but their children were born here or something like that, that they also became citizens. So we don't have the word citizen on any of the avatars prior to the 14th Amendment.
right, right.
And sometimes the kids will say, I don't know, am I eligible to vote because I'm not a citizen? And I said, well, look at the card. These are the characteristics you have to have. Do you meet those? And the answer is yes. And then somebody who is an indigenous avatar will say, well, it doesn't say it on mine either. And I think I'm pretty white, And so do I belong there? And I'll say, stand up for now, because it'll work out. So just be there. Um, so at any rate, it raises those kinds of questions while you're playing the game in kids' minds, particularly high school and college kids. Not so much middle school, although there are some sharp kids. We're doing a whole series this year in Neptune Middle School, because of the new civics requirement that was passed. So we are doing a 6-week program for every single 8th grader in the school, which is really rewarding. But there are some middle schoolers who jumped all over this. And the next one, which is the truth about turnout, I actually changed the slide that with the kids' input. This one young woman was adamant that slide was very misleading, and there's a much more complicated reason why. But I said to her, okay, work with your teacher, tell us what the slide should say, and then we'll change it. As long as it's accurate, we will use your version. The slide in the truth about turnout says, historically, the older you were, the whiter you were, the more education you had, the more likely it was that you were going to vote. So you've got the power that those original groups had. If you don't vote, then you don't have the power. And when we first set this up, we had an historical timeline. We changed it slightly. We truncated the timeline to the point where these kids and their parents would have been alive. And what happened is that in 2008 and 2012, the Black turnout was higher. So it looked as if it was just a matter of a couple of years, but that Blacks did turn out at about the same rate whites did, if you looked at that graph. So she was right. She picked up on something that we didn't. And that's one of the things that's wonderful about this program, is that you are free to, once you have your own copy, and that's easy to do. Once you have your own copy, you are free to adapt it, as long as you check that it's absolutely accurate historically, and as long as you don't add images that have copyrights attached to them. So you can do what you want to make it appropriate for your setting. Hunterdon County is going to be very different from a presentation that takes place in Newark. So it's important to make it appropriate so those kids where you are make sense of it.
Mhm.
Okay, so back to the chart that's here. In order to make it a little bit easier for people who do this for the first time, I set up schemas and used people who are the avatars. The avatar cards exist that are distributed the way they should be for the game that goes on. So if you're working with a small group of kids, say in a club, you might have only 10 kids or 15 kids. When you start getting into classroom sizes, you probably have 20 or 20 or 30. And what you'll see in the 20 is that I've left some things blank, and that's where I used to insert those additional characters. When I go into a class, if there are going to be like 25 people in the class, I'll have in my mind which ones I'm going to add, but there's always somebody absent. So it winds up being okay. I'll say, okay, who doesn't have an avatar yet? Would you please be Aretha? And then give them that card. So like I said, I hope it makes it equal. I did this one by color because I was using it with a citizenship class online, and it was easier for me to when I'm reassigning people, it was easier for me to quickly just jump to the correct color. So that's another avenue that you might think about too. It is so rewarding to work with those people who are trying to earn citizenship because they really want to do this. And we have one slide that we add for them, and it's a slide that asks them first to tell us what voting is like in the country that they came from. So it engages them very quickly in what's going on. And then
how long does the game typically take?
The game up to the 1920s, when I have them sit down, takes about 20 minutes, which gives you another 20 minutes in most cases to use the rest of the program. If you have block scheduling and you've got 80 minutes, I would say use this and then take a look at the truth about turnout and see if you want to add some of that slideshow to what you do. You can make this extend. You can get into really good discussions, and you can make just the timeline of suffrage fill an 80-minute period if you want to. But for someone starting out who's just reading the script, it's not likely to do that. It's when your teacher genes kick in, and what you want to augment in the program. Okay, so those are the two things that are available to you. You've got the avatar folder, and you've got the slideshow and script. And as I said, you're welcome to adapt both to meet the needs of your particular setting. All right, let me see if I can go back and find out where that steps to start up here. Okay, so the next thing is to actually schedule these presentations and to get the volunteers that are going to work with you. We never send someone into a classroom alone, and there are a couple of reasons for that. If one person forgets a part, the other one can fill in. I had an instance once where the teacher who was doing the major part of the presentation went into an absolute coughing fit, and we had to send her to the school nurse. The other one took over, so it allowed it to continue. So we also encourage people to observe when other people are teaching. When somebody is a little hesitant about doing the presentation themselves, that can relieve any concerns that they have when they see it's really not that hard to do. Especially if they're not teachers by background. And you don't have to be. You can do this. We've got people of all kinds of backgrounds who are good presenters. Once you're finished with the first presentation, I would suggest that you ask for feedback so that you can improve your own presentation. Most of the time when we get feedback, it's really, really helpful. With the middle school classes that I was just talking about, I wonder if I can find, no, the slide is on a thumb drive. I made a copy just for that school and for the 8th grade. But the teachers suggested we just have, let me see if I can get it in. We just had the years of elections on one of the graphs. Let me see if I can find it. Truth about turnout. All right, here. The just above the 0% line, that none of that was there. So the kids were looking at these numbers, and I said to them, "How old are you?" And the teacher who was working with me was kind of blown away when the kids hadn't been alive for the Obama-McCain
Yeah,
election.
I don't think we're looking at the same screen.
Okay. I'm gonna stop the share and try this again. I don't know why it's doing that.
If you share your screen, don't just share the whole screen and then it'll go to wherever you're going. Otherwise, it's only on one thing. Now we see it.
Okay. All right. So none of the presidents' names were down here. And because these are 8th graders, they've only been alive 13 years. So, much of that was not familiar to them. But you can see as I begin to flip through, this is the part that you can now see when you're talking about turnout by race and ethnicity. And it looks like it's just a matter of a couple of years when the turnout flips and black turnout is as high as white turnout. But when you begin to add Asians and Hispanics, you can see that their turnout is much lower. So this has an impact on those groups. But the way we changed the slide that I was talking about, oh, that isn't changed. The young woman changed it to past tense. So who made all the decisions that affected all of us? It turns out historically, older, whiter, more education, the more likely it was that you would have voted and had the power. And it had, been more like this initially. So, okay, let me see. Go back to. Okay, so once you have had one successful presentation and you've gotten feedback, then meet with one another and see what you need to modify in your own version of the slideshow. Also ask whoever the teacher or the social studies supervisor was to recommend the program to one other teacher, supervisor, whatever, because that will help it grow. So I think you're hearing the word one over and over again, and that's the way it grows. Don't try to do everything at once. So you're in 6 different areas or 6 different parts of the town. Focus on one of those first for yourself personally. You can get a partner in that town or that area and then work on that school in that area and then ask them to extend your influence. You can also promote the other modules to the host. and emphasize that they can use them in their classroom. They don't need to invite you in. You are happy to come in if they want a guest speaker, but don't feel they have to limit themselves to having you in. And then if you are working with an administrator,
Again,
go ahead.
could you say that again, what you just said about leave? What would you be leaving?
You can give them I have business cards that I made up with the website, and then also with our Facebook page and our Instagram page. You can just give them the link for the website and they can find what they need there. That would be that page that has the whole list. So they would
type
see
of
all.
presentation that we would have done as volunteers.
Or they can pick and choose parts of it. Okay.
Can I ask a question? When you said that, this is after you've presented once.
Mhm.
It's not just, because I know my school district is like, no, thanks, we don't need any help. They would love to have me offer to just send it to them and they do it themselves. And I don't trust that they would.
They may not. They may not. I would say start where you get an entree, and
Okay.
eventually the word will get out that this is pretty good stuff. The reason that we are in for 6 weeks in Neptune High School is because we started once. When COVID struck, we had we could do remote teaching for the teachers, and they were really happy to have somebody come in and help them out at that point in time. And then that word spread, and so now we've been invited back to do this whole series for them.
Thanks.
So that's how it works. I mean, don't feel like you're going to have to solve the whole world's problems in one shot. One district, one program, and it will grow.
Okay. Thank you.
And I would encourage, if you are working with an administrator, really offer to come in with a professional development workshop and do the timeline of suffrage and stop it when you have asked people to sit back down again.
Okay.
We've also found that different programs are more frequently requested at different times of the year. So January, February, and March, we get lots of requests for fighting for the vote. Prior to an election, we get more requests for the Student Advocate Toolkit than anything else. We're starting to get requests for vote by design as people learn what it is, because what that does is help you figure out how to make decisions that reflect your personal values, not what your family is doing, not what your friends are saying, not what you're hearing on the news. We've done that one frequently with adult groups as well. And it is surprising what they walk away with, that they didn't even realize that they were doing that they were voting just the way their tribe was voting.
Right.
We do offer 3 times a year, we offer training sessions during the summer. It's a full week and you can pick and choose. You don't have to come the whole week. During actually Monday night, I am presenting the first 2 lessons in I Am the Change, which are what's your issue? And then I Am the Change. There's a modified version for middle school of that, but I'm going to be presenting the high school and college version. And then people can find the middle school version on the website if they're working with that group. I did that last night with Equal Opportunity Fund program at Monmouth University. I had more fun and the kids had fun. It's very interactive. Is somebody trying to get in? Let me just go back. Boop, boop. Stop the share. No, I don't see that. Okay. It's very interactive, and these kids were all over the room figuring out what their personal issue was and finding other people that were passionate about the same thing. And then the next time we go back, we're going to work with them on I Am the Change, so they have actual practical experience contacting either state or federal legislators, or preparing a 5-minute public session speech that they can use at the local level or at the Board of Education level if they're trying to make a change at the lower levels of government. It's a very practical, hands-on kind of thing. It's good. All right, so again, that's a lot.
So you're doing the training on Monday night. I mean,
Yes.
are you saying that we can watch it, or or you record
Yeah.
it, or?
It both. I can send you the link. In fact, if I'm good, I might even be able to get it right now. No, I'm not going to mess with that right now. I'll send it to you afterwards because I don't want to wreck anything that we've got up and running right now.
And where's
So,
the information for the summer training, or this?
that will also be advertised once this one is over. On the first day of the week, we do Fighting for the Vote and Timeline of Suffrage and the Truth About Turnout. The second day we do the voting simulation, Vote by Design. And then the third day is Fighting for Change. What's Your Issue? And I Am the Change. Fourth day is Across the Divide, Listening and Speaking. And then the fifth day will probably be training about the digital citizenship this year. Okay, send the link to register. And as I said, it'll be recorded, so if you can't come, you'll get the recording after the session, as long as you've registered, because then I can, have the contact. All right, we have some time still. Do you want me to show you the timeline of, the Student Advocate Toolkit?
Sure. Sure. I mean, that sounds good.
Okay,
So Pat, if I could just back up, like,
sure.
if you were going to, like, I've already talked to Dave Heisey, who's the principal at Scotch Plains Glenwood High School, and I think he's on board for this.
Excellent.
So I was going to do 2 modules, and then the actual election day, which I'm not sure that you've covered yet with this group. What 2 modules would you recommend?
The Timeline of Suffrage and the Truth About Turnout.
Okay. In my mind, you were like kind of pointing in that direction. I just wanted to clarify.
Yeah.
Okay. And then before you go into the student turnout, do you want to cover the information of like the counties bringing in the machines and the polling books and?
Sure. I can do that too. I was just going to say something else and it went, it'll come back.
This group has all been there, trust me.
Ask me again what you asked me, what would I start with? And I said Timeline of Suffrage and Truth.
And then when you go over what it looks, yeah. Okay.
It helps to do that. When we first started presenting the Timeline of Suffrage and Truth About Turnout prior to COVID, I was doing some pre and post testing, or pre and post questionnaire, as we call them, to see what happened. Part of the questionnaire asked about what the kids knew about the history of voting before and after, and part of it was about their intention to vote, whether they planned to vote for the president, for the governor, for their assembly people, whether at the state or federal level, for their town government, and for their school board. And what I expected to see was an increase, but I didn't know how much in anything in each one of the elections. And what we saw was that most of the kids intended to vote for the president. Mm-hmm. They had absolutely no interest in voting for anybody else, which concerned me. And I thought, okay, we have a lot of work to do. When we did the post questionnaire, same students, same day, their intention to vote in all elections was equal and high. We don't know if that translates into actual voting behavior. That requires a university study because you have to have an institutional review board determine that it's not going to harm anybody, and we don't have that as Energizing Young Voters. So I'm looking for funding to try to get a university to do that. I've got 2 individual researchers and one, the Walter Rand Institute at Rutgers Camden is interested in doing it. So I'm looking for the money. So if you know any foundations that might fund a project like that, just let me know and we'll follow up. I've got 2 in the works right now. One of them might work out to be okay, but I don't know. So I'm continuing to look for funding for that. If we find
I
out
could-
that the intention does continue into voting behavior, both in a major election as well as one of the infrequent turnout things, then I think it's amazing that we could say that 80 to 90 minutes of instruction would make that kind of a difference in voter turnout. So fingers crossed.
I could have used you in 2008, Pat. I was on the ballot in Summit with Obama for town council, and the undervoting killed me. And I blame the youth vote actually, because kids don't know about their city government. You know, they were
Exactly.
excited. They were excited to vote for Obama. They came in, well, to vote in the presidential, I should say. They came in, they voted for president, and about 358 of them, if I recall correctly, did not vote the rest of the ballot. Very, very painful.
Yeah. The other one that would have helped then is vote by design, because one of the things one of the things we know is that kids don't vote if they don't think they know enough to vote. And if they don't know what candidates are running and what the positions are, then they are not going to pull those levers, even if they pull the one for president, because they do know about that.
Right.
The other thing we know about young voters is that they tend not to vote for the first time if they are nervous about it. They don't want to look foolish. They don't want to make mistakes. And that's why bringing in the voting machine and having the voting simulation, which is a much more complex thing than just bringing in the voting machine, is really helpful. And that we like to do with high school students, especially juniors and or seniors who will be voting for the first time, because it really reduces their anxiety. And, kids will walk out saying, I can't wait, and now I know what to do. I'm not afraid anymore. Because we even challenge kids and say, I'm sorry, your name's not on in the poll book, so you must not have registered. And we coach the kid and say, I did register, and then we stop everything and say, okay, all the rest of you, what should he do? And nobody knows the first time you do this. Nobody knows, not even the teachers. And then we do it to a second person and say, oh, this says you voted by mail, so you can't vote again here. And the kid says, but I didn't vote by mail. I got this thing in the mail, but I never turned it in. And we stop everything again and say, what should she do? And maybe one person will say, should she ask for a provisional ballot? And the answer is yes. And then the third time we challenge somebody, it's like, what should he do? And it's like, ask for a provisional ballot, for God's sake.
Well, I'm also a master poll worker, and hopefully they don't have to ask. The poll worker should be handing them a provisional, no questions asked.
Yes, that's right. And I think the tablets make a difference in that.
So much easier. Yep.
Yeah. So, I mean, it wasn't deliberate on people's parts not to offer it, but if you're not reminded, it's something that the person who's voting needs to know to do. So at any rate, those 2 things also, this vote by design is the lesson that is broken down by different types of elections. So if you have a school board election coming up, you can use that. Let's see. So you can see if you've got a Board of Education election in New Jersey, you've got a slideshow. If you've got midterm elections, they're just adapted for like this one, New Jersey.
Sorry.
Sorry.
All right. So this slide, for example, it builds. But it actually comes up with the reference to where that power comes from. All right, enough of that. Let's go back to the Student Advocate Toolkit. All right. So you scroll all the way down, and Module 4 are the nuts and bolts of voting. So Maggie, was it you who said, are you going to talk about this? All right, I think it was. So there is.
Sorry, I was muted and I was eating, so I stopped my video, but yes, I was shaking my head.
Okay, the How to Vote Rules of the Road is a slideshow. We've got a community version and a school version, so I'm going to go to the school. Can you see the slideshow? I'm checking now.
Yes.
Okay. So these are the questions that this slideshow actually answers. And it goes through things like, you know, registering. So if I've got registration forms with me and the school hasn't had a drive, I say, are you 18 years old? Here, go get out your phone, go to NewJerseyVotes.gov, check to see if you're registered. And if you're not, here's your registration form. Even though you can vote,
Hey, Pat?
even though you can register online, we kind of discourage that because signatures can be an issue with the online registration.
Is
So-
there a way to find out if they've had registration drives?
Yes. Oh, you can just ask the school.
Okay.
So we talk about, you know, who actually casting the ballot, the different types of elections, where you go to vote if you're going to the polls, but you can also vote by mail, that you get a sample ballot or a vote by mail ballot. We talk about voter eligibility, voter identification, what the actual polls look like if you go, and the fact that there is no connectivity in New Jersey to a central location. So it's very secure. They'd have to hack every single machine to make a difference. And then we give them the Vote 411 and just energizing young voters information. So that's a very brief overview for the kids. The voting simulation is,
Could I,
go ahead.
when you said about the online registration, that there can be problems with signatures.
Yes.
Can you say a little more about that?
Because you need to use a stylus on the screen in order to sign it. If I'll back up. If you've got a driver's license, the signature there or any other government form, the signature there can be used to verify who you are. That's not a problem for students who were born after November 1st, 2000, or who turned 17 after November 1st, 2018, are automatically registered unless they opt out. So they don't need to re-register. But if you have older students or community members, if they're trying to write their name on the pad, and then they go in to the to actually vote, their signature on the pad may not look the same. I don't know about you, but I've done it in the supermarket where maybe the first initial shows up and none of the rest of it. So there were a lot of challenges in that first election because of signatures, and people have the ability to cure that signature, but not everybody does. So in effect, their vote is being suppressed. They're not having the right, they're not able to vote. It's not that they're not eligible to vote. So we encourage kids to use the paper form And we actually carry them to the Board of Elections or mail them to the Board of Elections ourselves when we go into schools, because you can do that. There's no law about bearer limitations for registration forms, which there are for ballots, for vote by mail ballots. You can't carry more than 3 outside of your family.
Can I ask another question? When you said at their 17, they get automatically registered, is that through the state or is this through the motor? I mean, like a driver's license or something?
It is when they get their driver's license at 17 or a non-driver government ID, that signature they're automatically registered. So that signature is their signature for when they go in to vote.
Okay, so a lot of the kids, though, especially whatever generation we're down to,
Z,
apparently is not quite as interested in driving as their
that's
predecessors.
right, exactly. And that's the point that we make when we talk to schools. You can't, especially in underrepresented areas in terms of voting, many kids do not get licenses. And so they need to be given the opportunity to register.
Thank you.
No,
Just
Pat-
in my
Pat, let me-
university last night, I had about 20 kids in the room and we walked away with 9 registration forms.
So Pat, let me ask you a question here to clarify what you said. So I got that if they do a driver's license, the signature will carry over to voter registration. But I thought they actually had to check something to become on their driver's license application to become a registered voter. Is it automatic or is there a step they have to take? And the real reason I'm trying to figure out is, out here in Hunterdon County, does that mean 98% of the kids get registered, or is it 50% because they didn't check a box or something?
No, it is automatic. They have to check a box if they do not want to be registered. So they have to deliberately opt out.
Okay.
Otherwise, they're on it. As of November 1st, 2018, they were automatically opted in. So it was called the Motor Voter Initiative, and it was passed that day.
Okay, and that makes sense to me. But then I also know some of our folks from Hunterdon County went and did a voter registration drive at Raritan Valley Community College and got like 60 people to register. So how would those folks have kind of fallen through the cracks and obviously drove themselves to RVCC and not ended up registered?
Maybe they
It's
ride.
possible that they were registered. When I am in a more informal group, I actually pull out my own phone and go to NewJerseyVotes.gov and I say, here, check whether or not you're registered. And they put in their name and their birth date and I think address, and it pops up either no record or it pops up with their voter ID and all of the information about them. And if no record shows up, I say, do it again, just because you're not sure, maybe, your finger did the wrong thing. And if it comes up twice, no record available, then I hand them the registration form and they register. There is no harm in having a student register for the second time, because when that registration form gets to the county, it's only the most recent form that will actually be used to verify that they are eligible to vote.
One
Okay, thank you.
thing to look out for, Pat, if I could, when they're looking themselves up, just from lots of experience, especially with the new electronic poll books, if it's a name that starts with an MC, for example, there may or may not be a space between the MC and the rest of the name.
Right.
And O names, O'Hara, O'Shea, will not have an apostrophe. Sometimes they have a space, sometimes they don't have a space. So
That
those are
is
kind of
really
tough when you're doing the lookup, because it has to be exact to find them.
That is really good to know. Thank you.
when we're working the polls, I often tell my poll workers to just start with the birthday and see if they can find them that way, because that's the best. But that won't help on NJ.gov when you're looking for, or NJ votes, when you're looking to see if they're registered.
Yeah, yeah. But as I said, it doesn't hurt to do it the second time.
Sure.
You know, you would do that if you had a name change or an address change or whatever,
Yep.
so it's only the most recent one that counts. Good information. Thank you for that very much. All right, so the voting simulation is what I mentioned to you that Plainfield is doing right now. There's no slideshow for that, but there is a very lengthy set of directions. This is what you need in terms of materials. This is what you have to do 2 months ahead, 3 months ahead, a week ahead. So it can be handled by a school district by itself. They need to be in contact with the Board of Elections. And I have found it much easier to have a league member from that county work with the Board of Elections from that county. It also takes something off my plate, but there's, you know, that simpatico if it's somebody right from the county that's working with them. All of the directions here apply to Monmouth County, so you would need to read through it to make sure the same thing is true in your county. And then just make whatever adjustments from there. I mentioned Union County. Union County has allowed Plainfield High School to develop their own ballot face so that it reflects questions that are facing the kids in school right now. They are putting on a public question so the kids learn how to deal with a public question on the ballot face. And they're doing all of that for free. Some counties will not do that. They have a standard educational ballot that they use, which is fine. It's just not as much fun because it's not directly related to the kids. But, you know, one of them was like, what's your favorite ice cream? What's your favorite topping? You know, do you like it in a dish or a cone? So they had several choices that they can make, but there was no public question. Some are even simpler than that. Do you want to vote for the Yankees or the whoever? Giants? I don't know who it was because I'm not a sports person. Most of the counties that I've worked with have provided transportation of the machines to the site and a monitor at no charge to the school district. But I let the school district know ahead of time that there could be a charge for that. And then I let them know that if the school district doesn't have petty cash that can pay for it, and generally we're talking $200, $250 range. If the school district doesn't have petty cash that can be used for that, energizing young voters, when we're sponsoring it, we'll pick it up. If leagues have that kind of money, I would ask them to do it. If it's because it doesn't happen that often, I feel comfortable with that. Even if the league doesn't have that kind of funding, we have money that we will use for that particular purpose. And we have it because I ask people to donate for that. So it's there if you need it. To give the kids the experience of actually signing in and being challenged, like for voting by mail, when I've done it, I've actually created the old-fashioned poll books so that the teacher or person in charge gives us a list of student names, and I'll get back to that, and I literally cut them and paste them into the old-fashioned page books. I do it while I'm watching TV. It doesn't take a huge amount of time, and it's just really exciting for the kids to see their name there and then to come in and sign it. Some schools have concerns about student privacy when we do that. So when that is the case, I ask them to put down the student's first name and then the first 3 letters of the last name. So there's no identification for us. And we also give those pages immediately back to the teacher at the end of the presentation or at the end of the day. So there is nothing that connects us to the students in their school. It does take some logistics for the teacher to schedule the kids in the school. And they know their setting, so it's not something that we can even offer to do for them. In some cases, teachers have scheduled one class at a time to come down, and we set up an area in the school that looks like a polling place when they walk in. So we've got the table, we actually get volunteer poll workers to come in and sit behind the table, and we encourage the teacher to select a couple of student leaders to sit beside that person so they learn what the job is like. And we tell them that they can be poll workers if they're 16 or older and that they get paid for it. And we've gotten some kids to actually go through the training and work a day or two as poll workers, which I think is also a very good thing for leagues to be promoting. So the class arrives, they go up to the table, they sign in the appropriate book, and then they line up to go through the voting machine. If the students have seen what the ballot is like ahead of time, which we like to do, that's what we're doing in Plainfield. So they're actually getting a sample ballot ahead of time too. So they know what they're going, how they're going to vote. They go in, it takes maybe between 30 seconds and a minute for them to go in and out. So you can judge the class size. Half an hour is usually plenty for a single class to go through. If it's larger than that, just figure a minute per kid so that you know how long it's going to take you to get through the number of students, and you'll know how many voting machines you need. In Plainfield, for example, we're going to have 5 voting machines there and 5 monitors. That's why I said I was floored when they offered that. But that will allow them to get everybody through in just a morning. Does that make sense to you, figuring out the number of minutes and how many kids you can get through?
Mhm.
Okay. All right, and then just directions about somebody stands at the door, tells the kids what to expect when you walk in, where to go. We know that you are respectful and that you'll wait in line, until it's your turn, blah, blah, blah. And then just a checklist for the person who is organizing it.
Pat, do you think it's confusing at all for the students if you're still doing the paper books, since we're never going back to paper books? With the electronic poll books now at the polls?
I don't know if it is or not. That's a good question. We generally have the electronic poll books there to show them how it works. I don't know if, and this is something I could find out, if there is a way that we could have students programmed into an electronic poll book.
Or you could give them names, if the electronic poll books are set up with certain names, you could, assign the kids names or something. I just feel like you're going to a lot of trouble to make paper poll books and they're not used anymore.
That's a good point.
Terry,
So-
what's your best guess on whether Union County Board of Elections could provide the electronic poll books?
Sorry. I can't unmute. So I think they would. I think that they take the actual voting machines. You see them, around election time. You'll see them in libraries and things. So I imagine that they would take them into schools and with the electronic poll book as well.
Okay,
Yeah.
so we could talk to
as
them.
Pat mentioned, Union County Board of Elections is awesome to work with.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they are providing us with the poll books or the tablets so that the kids will see what they're like.
Right.
Well, I'll have to find out.
I mean, I just hate to see somebody go to all that work for, to put
Yeah.
together a mock-up of
You're
a
right.
paper book that's not being used anymore.
Yeah.
And the
So-
electronic poll books are so much better.
Right, so we would just have to pick out a kid. And also, when we pick out those kids, we ask the teachers to make sure they pick kids that won't be traumatized by being challenged when they come in to sign the poll book.
Right.
Because you don't want to create trauma and have somebody never vote because you were there. So, I'm gonna ask the kids in Plainfield afterwards. I'll ask Tristan to kind of informally poll them and see if they think, after having done it in the poll book, if it will be a problem for them to use the tablet afterwards.
But, and also maybe Plainfield has a feel for how the county is working with them in terms of what Maggie was asking, do they send an electronic poll book over, and are they
They
able
do.
to program in a couple of names,
Oh,
or
that I
could
don't
we give the students a couple of fake names so that they, because they must have some sample data in there to use for these simulations.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
Yeah, you could
Pat?
just fake names along with the avatars.
Yeah, yes,
Pat,
yes.
it's Susan. I just wanted to share with you, I was just sort of chatting with John about this. We had a baby program that we tried last year at RVCC. It was really a baby program because we were just kind of throwing it together as we went. And we went for about 3 or 4 days. It was Christina and Robin, Susan Blubaugh, and I. And we were not nearly as organized as this is, but what we did do, and actually the request for us to come there came out of their student government. They have a group, and we did go there, and we just circulated. We worked through the cafeteria. We worked in the halls. We captured kids who were crossing between classes and so forth. And it was an interesting and fun activity for us and for them. Some of them had registered and knew it. Some of them did not know if they registered. But what RVCC was participating in, and I guess it's a regular thing with community colleges, is that if you have already voted or you make a pledge that you will vote, then your college gets points on that. And that was the thing that you probably are aware of this. The kids were most excited about the fact that they would sign this pledge. We had little iPad kind of things, and we would give them the "I will vote" or "I have voted" or whatever sticker to put on their jackets. And it was just a baby thing. It wasn't organized. We're planning to do some more of it, but working with the young voters was astounding because how many did not know that they were registered.
Yep.
And how many had no idea where they would vote if they were registered. We did have that information with us, but it was useful to have because they didn't have it.
Yes, absolutely true. That's pretty much what we have found too.
Yeah.
You're talking about Ballot Bowl, which is a State Department program that I think Eric Kipnis is the person in charge of that. And it has been very successful. He's trying to get something going for high schools as well. But it's a very complicated thing to set up, and he is like at capacity for a lot of the things that he does. So I'm not sure how quickly that'll roll out, but it's in the works. So
and actually what we're doing here is like amazingly helpful for us to have, to bring back and share.
Good.
Thank you for that.
Well, thank you for that feedback. I really appreciate it. So that's the voting piece of it. And then the Student Voting Advocate Toolkit, as I said, developed during COVID because there were so many changes then, and people were so anxious about the changes. And we couldn't get out to do any kind of league work to help to alleviate that concern. And, we did Zoom things, but you're probably not getting the people that you really wanted to get. So one of our members had the brilliant idea of using the kids as advocates because we were getting into schools remotely. So She developed the Student Advocate Toolkit. And a couple of things here. Now, because we have other states working with us now, there are already states that have modified it to their state. In New Jersey, as you know, we have everything different for every single county, which just makes me crazy. But we have a basic New Jersey Student Advocate Toolkit in English and one in Spanish. The Spanish one is a very rough translation, and we usually ask somebody in the school if they will go over it to make sure that it's not got some quirky things in it. There's the template. Let me see now. Go back to the New Jersey toolkits. Come on. There we go. All right. So Union County and Hunterdon County are not here yet.
Yes, there is.
Oh yeah, very last one. So let's look at that one. All right, so one of the things that has to happen here is that the QR code changes depending on the county. So in Hunterdon County, I can help you do that if you don't know how to do that yourself. But if you look down the, that's not what I wanted. Yes, it is. All right, if you look down, you'll see the blue frames. And those kind of divide it up. So kids can use the QR code to download it to their phones and then save it on their phones. And then we ask them to go home or to go to their households or their pods and try to get one person to register to vote or out to vote in that election who had never done it before. So it was like a challenge. It was fun. We had one teacher come back to us and say, one of his students came back to him so excited. She said, I got my grandmother to vote or to register. She has never voted in her life. Wow. So, yeah. So, and this was again in an underrepresented area. So that kind of, it's like the old smoking campaigns. If your kid asks you to stop, you have a hard time not paying attention to them. And the same idea was behind this. So this is the calendar that our person changes election by election. And you can see this is the last election cycle. So what she's doing right now is creating the same thing for the primary election. And you can get that by going back to our basic New Jersey one, or you can just go to your own County Board of Elections website and you can get the dates and fill the dates in there for yourself. We have, after COVID, we have used this in person. It doesn't have to be done remotely. The kids can still download it to their phones and take it home with them and refer to it if they need to in order to help somebody. And one of the things that I love is this. This is a whole bunch of excuses that people give.
Right.
And a response to that excuse. So that if the kids are confronted with an excuse by somebody like a friend or a family member, they can flip through these and see if they've got the answer if they don't know it themselves. The other way we use these cards is when we teach the truth about turnout. The last thing we do at the end of the class is talk about excuses people give. And again, I have these laminated and I have the excuse on one side and a possible response on another. So why should I vote for a party that doesn't do anything for me? And then one potential answer is on the other side. So each kid gets one. And they are given a minute to read what the excuse is and then to read what the response is. So now each individual child can respond to one thing. They're walking out with one thing, one tool. The game is that you pick somebody at random, and sometimes I do it like whose last name begins with L.A., and then whose last name begins with L.A.M., and eventually you find somebody that you can give it to. That person reads the excuse to everybody else, and they read it first before they call on anybody else, and they read it twice. That gives me an opportunity to say, it wasn't loud enough, do it again. And then they give a minute, and then they can call on anybody else in the room that they want to give a response. It doesn't have to be theirs, but a response to that excuse. And then it's the person holding the card's responsibility to add to that answer or to give a second answer. And then the person that just responded gets to do the same thing. And you can imagine the giggles and the people trying to hide, don't call on me, kind of thing. We also recommend to the teacher at the end of that class, those 2 minutes after you finish the lesson and you don't want to start something else, but you need some kind of a filler before the bell rings, use these. Ask one of the questions, see what the kids can come up with as answers, and then fill it in. Because every time you do that, you're creating another voter. And they do it. We have done this with leagues. The Patterson League is brand new this year. And we did this with them, and they were stuck on some of the answers. So they decided that at the beginning of every one of their meetings, they're going to do this. They're going to use one card and one response and see what they can get as answers. It's fascinating. It's really, really fun. So you can keep those 3 things in mind. So you can use that in the Student Advocate Toolkit. You teach the kids how to do it. And then you can also use it back in the Truth About Turnout at the very end of the lesson.
Pat, on that last slide, I don't want to get too nitpicky here, but apparently I will. When you said, why should I vote for a party? Are you actually talking about party or candidate in that last excuse?
That's a good question.
Because, because if you use the word party, then you're kind of getting into, what, I think, that makes more sense to me, because otherwise, you wouldn't vote for a party that didn't do anything for you, because, right?
Good point.
So, thank you.
Thanks. That's nothing like that is sticky. I mean, it's not picky at all. Those are the things that someone sees who is looking at this for the first time that I never see because I have looked at them so many times. So thank you.
And obviously the word party could mean a person, but in this case, it could be confused with a party.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Pat, kind of in the same vein, circling back to something you were showing before, you were showing voter turnout rates by ethnicity.
Yes.
But I think for your target audience, also showing it by age group would be important, because then you're showing them that they're letting their parents and grandparents make the decisions for them.
Oh, good point.
You're right. Let me show you something. Let's do it the easy way.
While Pat's looking for it, I don't know how many of you saw, but there was an organization that came out. I saw it on YouTube, and it was a bunch of old white people, and they were, encouraging young people not to vote so that they could get their way. And I thought it was such a great.
That's a good one.
Yeah, it was like, please don't vote, sit the election out. We need to protect whatever they wanted, whatever appealed to, people over 65.
And that will encourage everybody to vote.
So what we do is exactly what you just said. We talk about, so who has the power of the vote? And then we start with age. and say, all right, so these are 18 to 24-year-olds. This represents the 25 to 44-year-old. This represents 45 to 64, and this is 65 to 74. And then we give them a chance to stop, and we go back to the slide, but we tell them, all right, write down a note of one thing you can know for sure by looking at the data that's represented on this graph, and then one thing that's a reasonable assumption that you can make based on the data on this chart. And we have already walked them through how to read a graph so that they're finding out what the graph actually is saying and what it is not saying. So we do it by age. We did do it by gender, but we are not doing that anymore because the census only has 2 genders still, and that can raise some real issues if you start talking about it. So we're skipping it. This is the race.
And by the way, if you were to do that age chart for the midterms, you would find it's actually much more dramatically different than even in the presidential years.
Yeah, you know what? The other thing, well, this is about the presidential, but Tufts University has an organization within it called Circle. And Circle analyzes and is focused on the youth voter turnout. It's a great website. It's a great organization. But at the end of 2020, they analyzed the youth voter turnout and the increase in youth voter turnout across the country in that election. And overall, there was a 50% increase in youth voter turnout in 2020, which is astounding. The range was from 23 or 24 up to 67% increase. Guess who was the 67%? New Jersey. Yeah, so it was like, oh, that's intriguing. And then I had my intern go back through the county data, hoping to find youth voter turnout segregated, what do you call it, disaggregated. But he couldn't find that. He did find the change in voter turnout in each of the county across the state of all ages. Monmouth County had the highest increase in voter turnout, the percentage. It was an 82% increase in Monmouth County turnout. And that just blew me away. Now, obviously, part of that is other age groups, and people were very energized about that particular election. But the fact that New Jersey had the highest increase and Monmouth County, out of all the counties in New Jersey, had the highest increase was really, really intriguing. And that's another reason why I really want to do that study, because if that's the case, that's the county where we were working prior to the 2020 election. So hopefully we'll find that out. So at any rate, this is the race and ethnicity, which you saw before, and then we do it by level of education, less than high school graduates, some college, and then graduate degrees. And again, we give them the time to stop and jot, go back and look at that so they can see it while they're analyzing it. And then we put them into small groups. Remotely, we put them into breakout rooms, but in the classroom, they just kind of turn and talk to people that are near them. And then that's the, historically, the older you are, and I'm going to have to change this slide too, the whiter you are and the more education you had, the more likely it was that you would vote. And then, so voter turnout turns out to be a big deal. If you, as young people, want politicians to start making the decisions that you feel should be made, then you need to elect the people that reflect those values. But is there change ahead? And yes, so we're talking about Circle and the increase in battleground states. It was 27. And then we talk about the way young people their age and can encourage other people to vote. Actually, some of the words they can use. This one, the second one, call them names, have them be something, not just do something. So we encourage them to say, you've got to get out and you've got to vote. Instead, say, you're a voter, aren't you? So let's go together. You're actually making it a part of their identity if you call them a voter rather than a single act that they have to do. And then this is where we say, so why don't some people vote? And we use the excuses game.
There's that party word again.
I'm so glad you're on this call. Oh, I'm gonna have to change that with a screenshot.
Pat, what's the league's position, like for me personally, and especially for younger people today? So I have 3 sons, 18, 23, and 26. And our family is fortunate in that my husband has always worked for a larger corporation. We have healthcare, blah, blah, blah. But I can't understand why the American people don't riot in the streets for a different type of healthcare that covers you, you know, lifetime, whatever you want to call it, universal, single payer, whatever. But the impact that it has, right? Like people stay in jobs, they go bankrupt, they, you know, spend thousands of dollars on Cobra or in the market. So when you're presenting something like this, are there guidelines that the league wants you to stay to? Because now it's like everything is partisan, right? If you talk about a woman's right to choose, gun control, healthcare, whatever, it's like people think you're a Democrat or Republican based on your opinion. So is there, you know, like me personally, I wouldn't make it personal, but just like kind of lay out the facts that, you know, if you don't have healthcare, these things can happen to you.
Yeah, you're right. I think the league's position is in line with yours. When we go into schools, we, right at the beginning of each presentation, we say, we are members of the League of Women Voters. League of Women Voters has 2 different goals. One of them is to empower voters, and the other one is to defend democracy. We adopted the same position as a nonpartisanship position that the league holds. And that means we do not take a position on which party should be in power. We do not take a position on which candidate should be elected. So we are neutral when we talk about voting. When it comes to the fighting for change, where we are teaching kids how to use the democratic system in order to bring about change in society in line with their personal values, we are not the same as the league. The league does take positions. Right now, they tend to seem to lean to the left, but in the past, they have leaned to the right. Our job is not to convince you to support a particular position. Our job is to help you determine the issues you are passionate about, the positions you think government should take to bring about the change that you want to see in your life. We are issue agnostic. We'll give you the tools, but we are not going to tell you what to believe. And that actually came from the Youth Advisory Board, because it is diverse. It's not all left or all right leaning. And they felt that if we tried to teach the league's positions, we would not be able to teach in their schools. Good point. So what do? So this was the solution: issue agnosticism.
Okay. Yeah, because I think Terry's point on party candidate is very valid. But again, my small sample of 3 boys, they do have a problem with both parties. My boys say that they lean left, mostly because they feel they wouldn't get fed if they came home. But I find that they don't want to identify really with either party, that they you know, they're very discouraged by the two-party system and, you know, things like that. So, you know, I feel like if they can be, you know, have the issues explained to them and have their input, and like you say, have them do their own education, then it becomes, okay, well, so which candidate is more closely aligned with the community I want to live in?
Perfect. And also, what can I do as an individual to make that happen? Even once the candidates are in office, you can't just assume they're going to do what you want them to do. You have to communicate with them. So we teach them how to do that. We actually, from that Young Voters Advisory Board, they decided to set up a legislative committee. And their target is issues that affect education K-12. They got a copy of the New Jersey Senate blinds list and chose bills that were being, you know, trying to be proposed or considered. And they selected the ones that they felt they wanted to get behind. They then learned whether or not those were actually being considered by the Senate or the Assembly during this legislative session, and narrowed it down to one bill that they really wanted to support as a group. And that too, actually, the one that they recently chose is one that would designate January as Hindu Awareness Month. New Jersey has the largest Hindu population of any state in the nation, and so few people understand anything about that particular religion, culture. And so it would be like having Black History Month, Women's History Month, just to raise awareness. The one that they got behind last year, and they're still behind, is A 1271. That is a bill that there are corresponding bills. It was presented in both the Senate and the Assembly, passed to the Senate, to the education committees in both chambers. It passed unanimously in both chambers. The Senate bill went to the floor. It passed unanimously on the floor. The Assembly bill was sent to the State and Local Government Committee, and it has been stuck there since March of last year. Nothing has happened. So the kids in this committee are now at the point where they say, well, so what do we do? You know, our letters didn't work, our emails didn't work. And I said, well, the next thing to learn how to do is to testify, and then see if you can actually get down there and move somebody to get that on the docket so that it is considered. They've got hundreds of bills in that committee, and, you know, most of them are going to die. This is the second legislative session that this bill has been promoted in or considered in, and I would hate to see it die before June, but that's part of the process. So be that
And
as
what
it
was
may,
the number of the bill again?
A 1271, and it's in the State and Local Government Committee. And it surprises me, Verlina Reynolds Jackson from Mercer County is the chair of that committee, and she is very engaged in youth civic education. So I am surprised that it has not moved. We have a couple of young people who are from Mercer County, who are 18, who did contact her office and got little to no feedback. So part of the process, but they're not going to let it go. So they may see it in the next legislative session too, and hopefully it'll be just as smooth a passage through the education committees and really get considered this time. So anyway, we are at 11:59. I'm willing to hang around if anybody has more questions, but I know that some of you have to disappear, and I appreciate everything that you've shared with me today. And I hope that things that I've shared have at least gotten you off the ground, that you know where you want to go now. So
Thank you so much. This has been so great
Yeah,
and
Great.
really helpful. Thanks.
I
Thank
ditto what Joan said, but with a little more enthusiasm. I could tell she needs another cup of coffee. But yeah, super helpful. And you know, I think all of us have a lot of ideas on how to help register young voters, right? Like, that's what we need to do.
Mhm. Okay, and if you do run any of these registration drives or something, if you would please keep track of the numbers and let me know, I would be most appreciative. We have one of the youth voter registration grants from LWVUS, and one of the things we need to do is to report back any impact that we've had on voter turnout in New Jersey. So I would appreciate it if you share that with me.
Yeah. of
Pat,
course.
Yes.
Pat, is this, is this a printable, I know you're recording, but is it a printable that we could print as much of this as possible? Just to have individual, I feel like there was so much here and I was taking notes like a mad woman, but I was wondering if we could also use up all the printer material in our printers and just have sort of hard copies ourselves as well as the video. Is that possible?
I don't know. I know you can make hard copies of the slideshows and of the scripts for each
Okay, well,
one.
that's actually what I was looking for. Yeah. Mhm.
Oh, okay. So go to the website,
Could you
download
put the link in the chat, Pat, please?
Sure.
Sorry to interrupt.
Nope, that's good.
I'd like to make it easy for myself.
Yeah, so I actually have to jump
you.
off, everybody. Thanks so much,
I do as
everyone,
well,
for showing
so-
up. Pat, thank you so much for the presentation. And, you know, we'll definitely kind of, like, once we have dates that are confirmed, you know, I'll CC you or send you an email and let you know, X date, we're gonna present these 2 modules at this place, and we've got Union County to bring the machines, and so this way, yeah.
Excellent. And keep track of the number of kids and the number of adults that show up for you too, so that you can see how you're growing. And if you're comfortable, share those with us as well, so that we have a sense of where it's going. Okay.
Great.
Perfect. Bye,
Thank you.
everybody.
Okay, thank you, Pat.
Okay, bye, Maggie. Thank you.
I just have one other question. Last year at Union County College, or I guess it's called Union College now, there was a woman who was doing energizing young voters. She had Cranford never told us that there were both of us doing it at the same time. And we were doing the old fashioned, just, going out and collaring kids and registering them. And she was down the hall, and I took her card and now I can't find it. And do you have any idea who it could have been? I think she was from Mercer. Is it possible? Maybe.
At Union County College, I don't know.
She brought it in and set up a table, and it was energizing young voters. And I didn't get a chance because we were running around ourselves, and then we had to leave because I had to go someplace. I didn't get a chance to go down and look at it, which of course would have saved us about 6 months. But she gave me her card and now I've lost it. So I just wondered if you knew who it was, but it's fine.
It might have been Rosemary Lamar. Was she a Black woman?
No,
No. Okay. Because I
She
know
was-
Rosemary.
a typically older white woman. And I don't know, I don't think she was from Plainfield. I'm part of the Plainfield group now, but I don't think she was from Plainfield. Okay, I just thought if you knew it off the top of your head. Thank you.
I wish I could help.
Thanks so much for this. This was so.
Thank you, Pat. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye. Thank you for coming. I really appreciate it.
Oh, it was my pleasure completely. Thank you.
Take care.
You too.